Hey, welcome to Film versus Movie, the podcast where we debate the cinema you hate. I'm your co-host, Belton DeLaine-Facey.
And my name's Chris Shurr.
And on this podcast, we usually debate the films that have been slandered and desecrated by public opinion. But today, we're doing another edition of Cutting Room Floor. And today, we have our guest, filmmaker and friend of the show, Anna Paone.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah, and so we're here to discuss your for short and origins into filmmaking. So I guess to start off, like, how did you first get interested in filmmaking?
I am from a family that watches a lot of movies, and I watched a lot of classic comedies growing up, and I wanted to discuss them with everybody at school, but I didn't realize not everybody watched the Marx Brothers or Some Like It Hot. So I actually got, I think, the screenplay to Some Like It Hot as a gift when I was in first grade. I'm not sure. I think a lot of it went over my head, but I'm not sure how much I really absorbed. But it was something I was interested in at a young age, screenwriting and movie making. I went to a filmmaking day camp when I was in fifth grade at the local community college, and it was just a week, but we spent some days making fun, very lo-fi films. And then I also had this fantastic book called Girl Director. I was actually just realizing I should have looked up who wrote that. But when I started to show an interest in filmmaking around when I was 10 or 11, somebody gave me that book. And that was really formative for me. It alternated between talking about famous women directors and not so famous women directors, and how you could make your own movies. And that was really empowering to me. And it was at a time when it talked a lot about film, still about Super 8 and 16 millimeter. And so far, my only encounter with actual film has been in film school, where I was and am really scared of using it because I'm scared of exposing it to light and messing everything up, messing up all the footage. But so, not everything in the book really applied to me, but it was very interesting and very empowering to know that I could make films.
Yeah, I was about to say something like it hot feels like a weird film to give to a sixth grader. Yeah, but I also feel like that's around the age like my dad showed me Blazing Saddles. I feel like there's just a definitive cutoff age where parents are like, okay, now I can show you real stuff.
Yeah, and I have a 19-month-old toddler now, and I'm looking forward to when I can show her.
Off topic. The name of the author is Andrea Richards.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to give credit to Andrea Richards for writing that.
Yeah, that's cool because I know a lot of filmmakers now, like they get started watching, YouTube channels that discuss filmmaking and kind of dissecting film. So the book feels like a version of that before YouTube was a big thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about how my daughter, for example, if she's interested in this, will have a lot more resources right at her fingertips to make movies and to learn about making movies.
Oh yeah, because even now filmmaking, sometimes I do stuff and it's like I have to Google what I'm doing. It's just like, man, people just winged it before the internet.
Yeah, that's true. I remember tape to tape editing on one of my early attempts at filmmaking. So putting a blank DVD into the VC, or not even a DVD, a VHS, putting a blank VHS into the VCR, hooking up the camcorder, and you would have to press the one touch record on the VCR to get the take you wanted on the VHS. And then, fast forward or rewind on your camcorder to the next moment you wanted, the next take you wanted, and then press record on the VCR again.
Yeah, I know that's like advancement in technology compared to when film first started, but compared to like Premiere Pro, that does sound like working with caveman tools.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and also I was, very young and didn't really know what I was doing, but also it felt so imprecise. It feels so much more precise now on Premiere, where you could just use the arrows and tab right over to what you want.
Mhm. Oh yeah. So you mentioned some like a hot. Were there other like big films or film makers you got really into, especially like during teenage years? Because that's when a lot of people start to find like their own like real artistic interests.
Yeah, I went through a big Hitchcock phase, and I mean, I would say I still like Hitchcock. Um, North by Northwest, Shadow of a Doubt, um, Notorious, all of that I really liked and still like. I'm trying to think what else I enjoyed as a teenager. Uh, I mean, when I was, I guess, early 20s, I remember when Inception and Dark Knight came out, it felt like everybody I knew was seeing those. That felt like the first big cultural moment for me. I wouldn't say I'm like a big Dark Knight person, but I would say Inception was pretty inspiring to me.
Did
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Chris, go ahead.
off topic again, but did you guys watch The Dark Knight repeatedly at your high schools like I did?
We didn't do that, but we watched every time we had a sub in French class, we would watch Mr. Deeds with French subtitles. We could watch it in English, but we had to have the French subtitles. But we would only watch, the first 30 or 45 minutes. So
Wait,
that's all I've seen.
are we talking old Mr. Deeds or Adam Sandler Mr. Deeds?
No, the Adam Sandler one.
Oh, okay, that's a great movie. You got that sub had some taste.
I have to say, I missed out on a lot of the Adam Sandler 90s stuff until I married a comic. And and then when I started watching Adam Sandler's 90s stuff, I was like, "Oh, no wonder all white male comics of a certain age talk like this, because you guys were all inspired by Adam Sandler."
Yeah, I feel like that's the like artist equivalent to how like a lot of women complain about marrying husbands that are obsessed with football. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, this is what we're doing every Sunday for the rest of our lives now.
I watch a lot of reality TV, so my husband, Matt, also has to be exposed to that.
Okay, so it balances out. Yeah. So exactly when did you start like actually making films yourself, or at the very least gathering friends for an attempt?
Well, I started out studying in college. I started out studying ancient civilizations and biblical studies. But partway through freshman year, I had an idea for a film I wanted to make about my group of friends at the time, and it was going to be a fictionalized version of what I anticipated happening to us 10 years later. And that was the first film, even though I was doing it with borrowed camcorders and, nothing fancy, no real lighting, just practical lighting. I That was the first time I was like, okay, I understand. I didn't know what coverage was. I didn't know what that meant, but I understand. Okay, we've got to get a close up of her first, and then we'll get a close up of him, and we're not just going to frame this like a stage play with one wide take. And then I ended up deciding to switch to majoring in film, and I made, a lot of small group projects. Like I said, we started out on actual film, which was really intimidating. And then when I graduated, I made a web series, which, I don't know how strong it is technically, but I think on a tiny budget with a lot of locations, and it's essentially feature length when you put it together. I think we did a pretty good job. And then before that, before college, the first film I really made was called The Real Truth, Real REEL, and it was about a girl who really wanted to be in a movie adaptation of a YA novel, which was a lightly fictionalized series of unfortunate events. So I made that. I don't think I ever finished it. That's one of the things I edited tape to tape. I made all my friends audition via phone. I sent them slides and everything. And so again, that was all just framed one wide shot. Any bloopers were left in pretty much. But I have a very rudimentary cut of like the first half of it that still exists. But I don't have it digitally. I think it's on a DVD at my parents' house. So otherwise, I would have sent it to you guys.
Oh, that would have been great.
Yeah.
That would have set the record for the oldest film we've watched in this series.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned starting off with actual film because I've heard that in film school, I've heard people say mixed things about it. What would you say were like the benefits to that, and was there stuff that you didn't like about it and feel like, oh, I would never do this again?
I probably don't know nearly as much as I should technically about it, so I'm just going from a very superficial perspective, but it looks great. You know, we started out with black and white and then we moved to color film. And color film, of course, you get these beautiful colors, these beautiful deep colors, this kind of timeless look. You get the grain, you get the noise. But I just after working with real film, I was thinking, I realize why everyone is switching to digital. It's just, of course, on a real film set, you have real loaders and things like that. But just being a college student who was so intimidated to ruin the whole film by exposing it, it was just too nerve wracking for me. And I think this was over 10 years ago, but already it was pretty limited, I think, where you could send it off to be developed.
Yeah, because I know, like, I've worked with, a coworker where for a program he was in, he was shooting something on film, and being on set for that, it felt like very quickly he was just like, "Okay, I'm running low on actual film," and just, like, trying to figure out how to save as much as possible while getting what you want.
Yeah, it's expensive, and, when you change it in the changing bag, you can't see what's going on, you have to feel everything out.
I always imagine editing would be just such a different process too, where you're like, you're almost doing, and you're doing a little bit of like arts and crafts almost versus sitting there with software where you're like, how can I piece this together so both ends match?
That's exactly what it is, and we edited on, I don't know if it's a Moviola proper, but we edited on one of those things where you have to physically reel the film back and forth, and you have the little magnifier in the middle. And I kept accidentally splicing it backwards, splicing the frames backwards, which was a huge pain. And you're physically cutting it and putting tape on it to splice it together.
Yeah, yeah, that's one thing that I feel would scare me about editing real film because, like, right now, if I like edit a draft of a movie, I have to go back and change something. It's like it's not a problem. I feel like at some point you're like, oh, this thing needs change. Is like we're just stuck with it now. Like it's just how it's gonna look.
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt.
Getting to like your earliest film that you were able to share with us, it's a film called The Leaders and the Rest. Uh, how would you describe what the film's about to all the listeners?
This is my thesis film from college. So again, this is about 10 years ago, maybe a little more. And I got fascinated with the collegiate secret societies at University of Michigan where I went, and also the fact that young Gerald Ford went there. And I did a lot of research on it. So I made a story about a girl named Pauline, who is a composite of two women, one of whom was actually at the university at the time, and one of whom was a friend of Gerald Ford's from Grand Rapids, where he was from. And she's a student activist, and Gerald Ford's Senior Honor Society slash secret society tries to prevent her group from hosting a controversial display on the Diag, which is the main quad at Michigan. And she's a friend of his from the past and kind of has a latent crush on him and is dealing with the conflict of that and her activist ideals.
Yeah, it was. it was definitely an interesting watch because, like, afterwards, it did make me want to look up stuff about Gerald Ford. So I'm also just curious, like, at University of Michigan, do they just like plaster that Gerald Ford went there everywhere, or and so he's just on everyone's mind?
He's on a lot of places. His name is on the public policy school. Um, I wasn't really in the athletic circles, but I imagine because he played football, he's plastered on a lot of the athlete stuff, the buildings and things like that. So actually, I couldn't find anybody at first to play Gerald Ford, so I made up little quarter sheet flyers with a picture of young Gerald Ford on them, and I started handing them out to blonde guys who I would see, and it said it said, "Do you look like this? Would you like to be in a movie?" But eventually I got, a musical theater student who agreed to dye his hair.
That's I think that's the most interesting casting process we've heard so far.
I think I would do it again because, now I haven't been actively casting or producing anything right now, but my mom and I have a theater company together in New Jersey, and you really gotta think outside of the box sometimes, especially for men. Unfortunately, you don't usually get as many men coming out to audition, at least for community theater. So I think I would, I think I would do the same process again if I had to.
Yeah, and so, like, one thing I also know, like, with this being a period piece, those are generally hard to do and require, like, much more money. So how were you able to pull that off on a film student budget?
We were fortunate in that they had some grants we could apply to get funding. My husband went to ASU and they didn't give him any money at all. He had to raise his own money or use his own money for student films. So we were lucky where they funded it, and I was just very I'm a fast shooter. I'm not very meticulous, which is probably not a good quality for a filmmaker. So I would just be like, let's go out, let's do our best, let's get the shot. I would frame stuff out. We did a lot of tight shots when we had to, a lot of bokeh lights in the background. There's one shot I think very early on in the movie where they're at the Michigan Union and you could see a very contemporary looking sticker in the window of the Union. But I mean, I was also fortunate in that a lot of the campus and a lot of the interiors still look like you could be in the 30s or 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the benefit of, like, a lot of brick buildings on campus. Yeah, yeah, because yeah, because that was also one thing I noticed, like, you guys had a lot of night shots,
I,
uh, which I feel like everyone for filmmaking, they're like, "Stay away from that."
I meant to say that too. I think that was kind of an edict I gave because I didn't want to worry about cars and about students in modern clothing in the background. So we did a lot of night shots. And of course, on a college campus that's more walkable, you have big quads and paths and things where you can frame out cars. And then I did an 80s period piece a few years later where I'm like, why do I keep doing this to myself? Where I have to worry about this.
Yeah, so I mean, like, just for everyone's reference listening, what are some of the complications that come with doing a period piece? Any others besides, like, trying to make sure cars and other people aren't in the background?
Yeah, I would say those are the big ones. Car noises. Um, I guess maybe depending on what period it's supposed to be, like the quality of electric lights could be an issue if you're outside. I'm looking at my street now and I'm trying to think. I don't know if I could even feasibly do it here, on a street that's open to cars. And I'm just looking at the exterior lights on buildings and thinking that would probably have a much more modern looking quality.
Mm.
I feel like one of the you have, as far as writing goes, you have to get the dialogue right without just like ham fisting in terms from that time period. Like, there's only so many times you can call someone a jolly good sport before you're like, okay, that's the only term from the 50s, That makes
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was something I struggled. I went through so many drafts of the screenplay But I think that was something I struggled with too, because you don't wanna sound too cutesy about it, but you also don't wanna sound too modern.
Yeah, it really is a fine line because I mean, in a screenwriting group I'm in, one time someone like submitted a period piece, and everyone was like, because of the way they wrote the dialogue, nobody had any idea what was going on, and it's like they were like, "This is period accurate," and we're like, "We believe you, but but like we still need to be able to put all the sentences together and comprehend them quickly."
Yeah, that's true. You want it to still be intelligible to regular audiences.
Yeah, so I mean, also one thing about that short, so this didn't occur to me until the second watch, but there is a trope with student films that when you have a party scene, you end up with a shot where it's just so clear there aren't enough people to actually be a party. I feel like I feel like I feel like watching the first time, I didn't even notice it. It wasn't until the second watch where I was just like, "Oh, you actually cleverly framed it so it didn't look like that in any particular shot." So I'm curious, like, was there a process behind like all the framing and like placing people basically extensive blocking?
Yeah, definitely, and I'm in that shot, I think, but some people who friends of mine who, like, auditioned and weren't cast were in that shot. Um, I basically opened it up to anybody I know. We shot it at an actual frat, and I invited the guy. I don't know if he's actually in it, but the guy who gave us permission to film in that frat, I think he's in it too. We got a ton of costumes from the local theater company that they let us borrow. But I think you're right. Not only is it the the token party scene in a student film, but yeah, I think we didn't have all that many people there.
Yeah. So uh, yeah, because yeah, because mentioned you were in this. You also have a background in acting, so I was also curious. Like, did acting come with filmmaking, or what? Did one come before the other?
I think acting probably came before. I know I throughout my life I've gone back and forth on pursuing acting and if I want to pursue it and how seriously. And I think I've come to the conclusion that acting is kind of the thing I'll most regret if I don't give it a shot. Of course, now that I'm a mom, giving it a shot looks kind of different. And yeah, I still submit for stuff. I don't know how much theater I would or could do because I don't really like being away from my baby that much. And also, like, nobody's asking me to do theater right now. But I would say acting is kind of my first love. And when we were auditioning people, I thought about playing the role in this, and my whole crew was like, no, that's ridiculous. You have too much on your plate, which for a student film was probably true. But since then, I have acted in some things I've written and or directed.
Is
Yeah. Oh, Chris, you.
Oh, I was just gonna say, is it hard to direct while you're acting? That's what I always kinda I just imagine, like, the director in a mirror just being like, "Act better," and then he just walks onto set.
Yeah, I would say it is hard. For my most recent film I did, which I think I sent you guys in Metuchen, my husband, I wrote it and co-produced it with my husband, and he directed it, which was a lot easier for me not to have to worry about that. I would say it's really the producing, especially on a small project or low budget project. It's really the producing that'll get you when you're acting. And this happened to me too on Emma Touchin, acting and fielding texts from the actors about when they're going to be at the train station and making sure everyone has a ride and making sure you get lunch for everyone. So that's the real hectic thing.
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, like, I personally, like, don't like acting. I'll do, like, small stuff with friends, but, I mean, we worked on a sketch where I directed and acted, and when it was, like, my turn for lines, I was like, "Oh, shit." Yeah, well, I do feel like everyone's different because you watch interviews with like Bradley Cooper and B. Jordan, and they were like, "Well, I was already acting. I want to do this role, and no one raised their hand, so I did."
Yeah, and that's another thing. Although I feel like actors will always wanna be in something, and actors will always raise their hand. But, that's another thing is, like, when it's a low paid or unpaid project and you're already doing everything else, uh, you're there from the time everybody gets there to when they leave. So, like, you might as well do a role if you feel inclined to do it.
Yeah. Back to the short. You mentioned it was your thesis film. Were there things you learned about filmmaking during the process that you still over and like remember for future projects?
One thing I think I did well, I mentioned that I'm not very meticulous and that I'm pretty fast. I always joke I'm essentially a lazy person. And I do think, like I said, that's not always great for a filmmaker, but I think that led to me really respecting people's time. Most student film, I was on other student films that had all night shoots and it was just exhausting. Of course, college students, if you don't have class the next morning and this is the thing you really want to do, of course you're going to go all night if you want to. But I liked how I said we never went longer than 2 a.m. and that was only for the party scene. So I was really proud of that. And then one thing I learned, uh, I'm trying to think about how to phrase this. Um, there was an older guy, an older man who was auditing my screenwriting class and who it ended up he was a member of the secret society that I was writing about. Um, and at the time, I thought that was fascinating and, would have listened to anything he said. And now I know that I can trust myself and trust my instincts. And especially older men who are auditing college classes are maybe not the most trustworthy of people.
He was actually there just as a spy.
Well, I got the idea because he was writing a screenplay about a different facet. This is probably going along with what you were asking about Gerald Ford being plastered everywhere. He was writing a screenplay about a different facet of Gerald Ford's time at Michigan. And so, throughout this, he was like a consultant on my movie. He was a producer. Like he knew I was inspired by his work. But before I knew he was in the Secret Society, I said, "Oh yeah, and Gerald Ford was in the Secret Society. You should write about this." And then I thought to Google him at some point, and I realized he also was a member of the Secret Society, which
He's
has
like,
since been disbanded.
well, my one note of the film is you should include the fact that everyone in the secret society is amazing in bed. That's
Yeah, that was basically that's basically accurate that he said that.
Yeah. Well, also just to go back to an earlier comment again, for all the night shoots, ending before 2 a.m. is very impressive.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I of course I pulled some all nighter, although I never really pulled all nighters till I had to edit this and I was faced with a deadline and I was having a lot of Premiere Pro troubles. But yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think when we were shooting it in the fall and it was in Michigan, so I guess it probably got dark around 5:30 or 6. Um I don't know. But I was on other student films. I was on one film once where we shot all night. And this is nothing against that director, but we shot all night. And then as we were about to, I think we were setting up all night. And then as we were about to get the final shot, it started raining. So I don't know. I just didn't want to go through that.
Oh yeah. So I guess since that first film, how you feel you've developed as a filmmaker?
I still don't think I'm a great filmmaker. I think that, of course, I'm constrained by time and money, like a lot of filmmakers are. Um, I think I have learned to get a little more meticulous. I've learned that while you can fix things in post, if you don't take advantage of things when you're on the set and you have the actors and the crew, there are some things you'll never get and never be able to do. I think I've learned to show a little more respect to cinematographers just because I think, I'd be rushing them. And I think also a consequence of trying to cheat things out of a shot and trying to get the perfect period shot and framing. I think sometimes I'd be like, just do it, just get it done. Or I'd come up with weird things like, let's shoot from below. Let's, tilt upward. And I think I've learned to maybe respect cinematographers a little more and let them do their thing.
Do you think that or just developing the meticulousness when it comes to filming in part has to do with the fact that as an adult, the constraints on everyone involved in the filmmaking process are much higher than when you're filming something in college?
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it, in terms of time and money, and also adults having potentially more on the line with their careers and actors needing higher quality footage. I think that's absolutely part of it. And yeah, that's true for me as a mom. I'm not sure the last film I made that I wrote in Metuchen, that was a month before my daughter was born. And then since then I've worked on a film that I was in that my husband wrote and directed. But yeah, I mean, for me too, and for a lot of adults, you're busy, you've got day jobs, you've got kids, you've got partners. And if you're going to take time away from that, you want it to be good.
Yeah, once you graduate, you can't just stay up till 2 a.m. whenever you want.
Yeah, I go to bed so early now because I want to get plenty of sleep before my baby wakes up.
Yeah, but I also feel like that like planning is a big component. At some point, you realize like, oh, it's good to to not just fix things in post, fix it in pre, essentially.
Yeah, I agree. And again, also if you're dealing with the constraints of time and money and technology, of course we have Premiere Pro, we have a lot of great tools at our fingertips, but obviously I can't composite anything really at all. Oh yeah, I have a friend who's done some compositing for me, but I don't have any great visual effects knowledge. So, and I don't have the budget for it, so I better get it done right if I want it done.
All right, so I guess with that, if you had to remake the leaders and the rest, what changes do you think you would make? Any to story, the way it was shot, or just things you did throughout production?
That's a great question. Also, I like that. I mean, I know this is the idea of the podcast, but I like that we're discussing this so much because I haven't thought about it so much lately, and it just feels like such another part of my life. So I like getting to relive it. I don't know. I think it was made by a college girl, and it's about a college girl, and it reads very naive, in terms of her having this conflict with Jerry, but also kind of being in love with him. And I think coming at it as a slightly older woman, I think I might, if not, characters are flawed. I'm not saying I would necessarily make Pauline more disinterested in Jerry, but kind of maybe framing Jerry more as a flawed person and framing Pauline more as a flawed person and not having her so enthralled to this man, maybe.
Alright, so I'm curious with that. Would you like make Gerald for the bad guy in the movie?
That might be interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, oh, sorry, you go ahead, Chris.
yeah, I was kind of just shocked by the ending. I thought it was going to be like a true feminist piece, and then at the end, when he's just like, "I actually did it to help you," and she's like, "Oh golly gee, you're such a swell guy."
Yeah, I mean, that's something that not only probably didn't age well, but also from my perspective now, again, being slightly older, like, yeah, I don't agree with this much. So that's something I could fix. And my thesis advisor had an issue with it. And I think I might have even softened it a bit from where it was originally. Yeah, I might lean into her activist stuff a little more. I think Jerry does get absolved pretty easily. And, by all accounts, he was I did a lot of research at the historical library on campus, the Gerald Ford library on campus, and his museum in Grand Rapids. I believe he's the only president who has his library and museum in two different places. I did research at the Detroit Public Library, at the Grand Rapids Public Library, at all the libraries in the Michigan system. Still now, I apply for jobs that require investigative stuff now, and I still cite this as an example of how I can research and investigate. But I think by all accounts, he was a nice guy in college. If something has come out in the last 10 years to show he wasn't, I'll stand corrected. But I think he was also this frat boy, this football player, this secret society leader. And I think, from my perspective now, if I met somebody like that, I'd be a little bit more like skeptical of them.
Yeah. You mentioned all the research. Was it just like kind of reading every biography and article on him you could find, or was it more extensive than that?
I think it was a lot of ephemera, a lot of pictures and like programs, and frat lists, and a lot of the Michigan Daily, which is the campus newspaper. That's the kind of thing I was really digging through the archives to find. And then I mentioned Pauline is a composite of two women. One is Pauline Cohen, who was a student activist. I believe she was from New York, but she went to Michigan. And now with more internet power, at one point, I feel like at one point in the last 10 years, I looked her up again and I felt like I found something. I don't know if it was an obituary, something extra about her that I hadn't found before. So I would do more research about her if I could make it today. And then also the other part of her character is a real woman called Frederica Pantland, who was from a very wealthy family in Grand Rapids, who was friends with Gerald Ford there. So I didn't go to Michigan. I don't know if or where she went to college, but she was kind of more like a socialite. So I had my main character was the composite of these two, but I think I could certainly do more research on the real Pauline Cohen, if I were doing it today.
All right. So did you come up with like the character, and then like in the research find Pauline and infuse her in, or did you like first hear about Pauline and decide to make a character off of her?
I think, well, I knew I wanted a student activist, and then I think I didn't have a name for her, and I found a line about Pauline Cohen, who was with the National Student League, and it kind of clicked. And I had my name. And there's also a street in Ann Arbor called Pauline. For a time, I lived off of Pauline, and I just liked that too. So I decided to integrate Pauline Cohen.
Nice. So I guess going off of this,
Wait,
like, oh, Chris, go ahead.
are you moving into the next section of questions, or
Oh,
because I had a
yes.
kind of off the topic question? Do you find you work with your husband a lot? Do you think there's like specific challenges that come with working with a significant other versus a regular person? Or is it mostly like a better process because like you trust and understand them?
I feel we're in a pretty good place about that. I think I'm probably the problem if there is a problem, just because I'm easily overwhelmed. Again, I think that goes with trying to shoot things fast. Um, these days, like I said, I don't really like being away from the baby, but yeah, I think I'm a little more high maintenance, and I think my husband, when we work together, he's the one who tries to have everything lined up and all the meals on set perfectly planned, because I'm the hangry one, I'm the difficult one, but I think we understand each other really well. One of the first things we bonded over was the fact that we both went to film school. And I think when we're so busy as parents, it's an important outlet for us to have. I know he said he wants to make one big short per year, and I'm on board with that.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
I guess one downside is you can't go home and talk shit about your coworkers.
Yeah, that's true. It doesn't mean we don't talk about the other actors though. No, but we have a good team that we've worked with, and I'm really happy with the stuff we've done together.
Yeah, so I'm also curious, like when you two are working on a project together, do you have to like set aside like specific times where it's like, okay, now we can talk about it, or do you just like come up whenever?
Yeah, I think we do have to set aside specific times. I mean, I'm working with a kind of limited sample size because two of the big projects we did, one that was quote unquote my film and one that was his, that was when I was like 8 months pregnant. And then the most recent one we did, we hired a babysitter, but obviously the baby existed. She was in our lives. So I think that has necessitated us drawing out specific times. I know for my husband's film last year, we hired a neighbor who has done some acting to come to our apartment and help us block out everything. So that was like a discreet, we're going to work on this here. But I think it's also something we both like talking about and like thinking about. I know, again, I'm the one who gets a little overwhelmed. So sometimes he'll want to talk about this stuff and I'll say no. Yeah, I'm overwhelmed with such and such right now. I can't talk about this now. But it's also something we enjoy.
All right. So yeah, moving on to the next section. If you had to cast one famous actor or actress in The Leaders and the Rest, who would it be for what role?
Oh gosh, that's hard. Let me think about that. I think part of the hazard of being an actor is, I tend to imagine myself and stuff. I'm trying to think of a young woman who could be Pauline. Um,
Who's the? I always blank on her. Who's the girl? Her eyes are kind of set apart. She was in
Anya Taylor
the men.
Joy.
Yeah, I could kind of see her maybe.
see, but I know as a as a jealous actor who's way too old for those
Yeah.
roles, I'm like, she's too perfect to play the role.
Yeah. I'm also mad based off of that description. I knew exactly who you were talking about.
Like it's not even that her eyes look bad. It's just the only. Yeah. Sorry, I know I answered your question, so it's my.
That's fine. I should have been thinking about that. Oh, I know, this is so out of left field, but um if we ever put um the older guy who was in the class, his script featured Willis Ward more heavily, who was Jerry's teammate on the football team, and Willis Ward has a small role in my movie. So, but I always wanted Jeffrey Wright for Willis Ward's dad. I know that's really random.
Mm.
This character's not even in my movie, but yeah, I mean, I'm very happy to see. We're in the middle of American fiction right now. I don't think we're gonna get it done by the Oscars tonight, but I want to cast Jeffrey Wright and stuff.
Yeah, he's someone where it's like I can't picture him wrong for a lot of roles for his particular demographic.
Yeah, I agree. I'm trying. Can you think of some blonde guys for Sherlock Ford?
Uh, the I mean, the first one that comes to mind is Glenn Powell, but I feel like he's too old to play a college student.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of. I'm okay. So for Pauline, somebody who comes to mind as kind of a quirkier, more studious seeming young person is the girl from Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. I thought she could be a good Pauline. She's a little young, but obviously by the time this hypothetical remake is
I don't know.
Uh,
Okay, I've got to look that up.
done. Thank you for looking up everything.
yeah, I usually have my computer like in front of me for this, but we're using it to.
Is the character's name Nancy Wheeler?
No, it's Margaret.
The really young
Oh,
girl, Abby Ryder Fortson, who played Margaret Simon.
play Pauline. I tend to like,
Mm.
I don't know, I want to see my fellow nerds represented. I don't know if she's a nerd in real life, but I want somebody who's who's a little quirky seeming.
Yeah, so I guess off of that, do you think it could be turned into a feature conceptually?
Oh man, I don't know. I went through like 10 drafts of this as a 20 or 30-minute film. Um, I know there's been pushes. This is what the older guy was working on. So there was an incident the prior year, which is alluded to in my movie, where the Georgia Tech team would not play Michigan at home in Ann Arbor because they had Willis Ward, who was a black player on the squad. So I know there's been some interest in some circles to make that into a feature. I could kind of see that more as a feature, but of course, I also I don't just want to say seed my story and say it wouldn't work. I don't know. It could work. I'm just so used to thinking of it as a short, and I also feel like I'm long winded as a shorts filmmaker. Like I feel like this is me. I cut things down to like 19 minutes, and that's all I can do. Um, but even now, I like still can't see it as a feature.
Yeah, it just existed as a short for too long. That's how it is.
Yeah, I mean, this is the most I've thought about it in years. Which, don't get me wrong, I love.
Oh yeah, no, no. I get what you mean. I had to dig up my old stuff for an episode of this. But I guess like the last question we have related to this, if you could direct or write any remake, what would it be?
Okay, so this I have a better answer for, and this I've been thinking about. So you guys like to talk about bad movies, right? I, I think when Matt was on, when my husband was on, um, he quoted something I believe I saw in Entertainment Weekly years ago, so I can't take credit for it. And it said, "Don't remake good movies, remake bad ones." So that's I believe in that. I think everyone should abide by that. So I would like to remake. I was obsessed with the book Inkheart when I was younger, which was a movie in 2008 that was pretty. It was pretty forgettable and pretty. It got pretty mediocre reviews. But I think I'm seeing these more complete, more artistic, more tonally dark remakes of other mid-aughts books I liked, like Series of Unfortunate Events, the aforementioned, which had a Netflix remake, and His Dark Materials, which was a series on HBO. So I think there is a way to make Inkheart into this more artistic, dark movie.
Yeah, I know I've heard that title. I vaguely remember that movie being advertised. But
Yeah,
I could not tell you anything about.
it was a January release. It was kind of dumped in January. Um, but yeah, I have to say, this is so embarrassing. I have a Pinterest board of actors who I would cast in the remake.
Honestly, I feel like more filmmakers should have that just on hand.
I had a joke once. I had a tweet that Dev Patel is on all my Pinterest boards regardless of topic. So he's not on he's not on that one, but I would cast him in almost anything. But I also think like I never liked how fantasy adaptations um aired on the side of casting British people, so I have a pretty American cast for this. I think I've got Tracy Letts, I've got
Mhm.
Jane Houdyshell, I have Rami Malek, I have Tom Burke, who's British. Um, I have Vicky Creeps, who's Luxembourgish, so she's not American, but I've got quite a range.
Yeah, I feel like once Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter got big, they just influenced all the fancy adaptations that have come out.
Yeah, well, and oh, sorry, what were you gonna say, Milton?
Well, I was just gonna say because I remember like I think summer after I graduated high school, there was one fancy adaptation that came out. I saw it with my friends, and and throughout the movie, we were just like, "Oh, that building is Hogwarts."
Oh, yeah. Do you remember what it was?
um, I'm blanking on the title of it. I know like I only went because a bunch of my friends had read the book, and it was something where I regret not walking out the theater.
That's
Um, oh, sorry, Chris, what were you gonna say?
give me a modern like trailer park fantasy story. I'd like give me like a little kid who's just like, yeah, I love magic. I use it to gather raccoons that get splattered on the road and bring them home for dinner. Like that'd be so much fun.
I agree. And then something else I would remake is one of my more grown-up fantasy obsessions is Gormenghast, which is it's not even really fantasy, it's just very gothic. There's no magic in it really. But it's a mid-century British trilogy, and this is something I got really into during the early stages of the pandemic. And there's a stage play version which I have directed, and then there's a 2000 BBC miniseries with a lot of Harry Potter actors, people who in the next year would go on to do Harry Potter. And it's yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like the series, but it leaves something to be desired. Um, and I think I don't know. I think I don't know how to describe it. I think with the things I want to remake or the things I want to make, mood and kind of uh, tone and quiet and letting moments breathe in the screenplay is is important. Um, and I think maybe some of the things I'm talking about, and maybe my own stuff too, is a little overwritten. Um, so yeah, it's such a gothic, moody book, and I think that's something. The kind of grandeur of this big gothic castle is something that's maybe missing in the adaptation. And I also think you need weird. I mean, it's a weird book. I think you need weird actors for it. I think you need really quirky looking people. Um, so yeah, that's. I won't name anybody. But I don't want to
It'd just
out
be like
people.
it'd just be like, "Hey, this actor isn't hot enough to not be in this movie."
I mean, I want to be in it, so I'm talking about myself. I'm trying to think. Oh, Barry. I'm gonna butcher his last name, but Barry Keoghan. I think he would be great as the villain. And I haven't seen Saltburn, but my understanding is that Saltburn is basically the same plot as Gormenghast. So if that gives you an idea, except it's in a gothic castle. So my understanding, I'm not the only person on the internet to have said this. Somebody else said Barry Keoghan should be in Gormenghast.
Hmm.
So that's an example of what I'm looking for.
Okay. Well, we are about to reach the end of our time. So before we head off, is there any big piece of advice you would give to any starting or potential filmmakers out there?
Ah, I would always hate when people would be like, all you need is a phone. When it when iPhones could start filming things. I would hate people saying that because I felt like it made things sound easier than they actually were. But I would say don't edit yourself, at least not at first. Just go for it, make things. And I don't know, I kind of think I guess I feel like a little bit of a fraud doing something like this because I haven't really made anything in a long time, but I think I could still consider myself a filmmaker, and I would say other people should too consider themselves filmmakers.
I mean, when people say stuff like that, I always say there's someone out there doing much less, and they're calling themselves a filmmaker.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have reached the end of our time, and thank you so much for coming on. Mm,
Thank you for having me.
mm,
Thank
yeah.
you.
So And so this has been another episode of Film versus Movie with the Cutting Room Floor. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.